With the war in Ukraine comfortably in its fifth year, there were reports last night that Ukraine conducted a series of attacks deep within Russia against an oil refining facility. The attacks resulted in over a dozen Russians killed and many, many more injured. But is this strategy of Ukraine targeting deep within Russian territory actually changing the course of the war? Russia reports that there was a major series of drone attacks on their Tanko oil refining capability. Now, this is coherent with a series of attacks by Ukraine deep into Russia targeting energy. The Ukrainians have successfully targeted 24 of the biggest 34 oil refineries in Russia, and that has led to a dramatic drop in Russia's ability to refine oil down to a 24-year low. The challenge, of course, though, is wars are won and lost in territory, and there's a grinding war of attrition happening in the Donbass, around Kostiantynivka, where Russia is steadily advancing. One of the challenges for Ukraine, of course, is that it can't get trapped in that war of attrition. That's a battle it would lose. So its strategy is to make Russia pay a very high price for every pace, every step it takes forward, something it seems to be doing effectively. However, you don't win a war by simply retreating from the battlefield. Ukraine has to find a way of taking the war better into Russia itself. Now, at the start of the war, Ukraine was able to target into Russia, but only a small distance, around 20 miles, the limits of artillery fire. But of course, as the war has continued, the West has ramped up support, and then weapons such as ATACMS missiles and, from the UK's perspective, Storm Shadow have enabled a much deeper strike, potentially up to 300 miles. And that's opened up a much broader array of targets, even brought the outskirts of Moscow within range. The challenge is, though, Russia is a very large country. Ukraine needs to strike even deeper than that. The West has capability to do that, but it's not got significant numbers, certainly not enough to help Ukraine. So the only way Ukraine was going to be able to do that is to develop its own weapons. And that's where weapons like the Flamingo missile and other long-range drones are proven so effective. They've also enabled Ukraine to target wild berries, which of course is Russia's equivalent of Amazon. One of the challenges for Ukraine, one of the reasons it has been so successful, is it's managed to incentivize its defense industrial base, particularly the Shakloon company based in Ukraine, that's developing a whole family of drones. This one is propeller powered, but there's also some jet powered drones that are enabling that long range strike. But how is all of this actually affecting the war? Well, of course, Ukraine recognizes in a David versus Goliath battle, it is the David. It cannot afford to get trapped in that war of attrition. It's got to leverage technology, particularly Western technology, if it is to prevail. Ultimately, it's involved in an arms race. Russia was a slow starter for this, but they're catching up fast. Ukraine has to find a way of innovating and innovating faster than Russia if it is to prevail. Now, Ukraine has proven very resilient during this war, particularly to the waves of attack from Russia. Drones, they find all sorts of ways to either jam or shoot down the drones, and likewise cruise missiles. They've been very effective with a layered defense, but ultimately fighter jets shooting them down if they get through. The big challenge, though, has been ballistic missiles. That's not just a challenge for Ukraine, it's also been a challenge in the Middle East, where Iran has been using a lot of these missiles. The main defense, ultimately, it's very difficult to shoot down these missiles in flight, and there's been a heavy reliance on the US Patriot missiles. The challenge, of course, is a lot of those have been used up in the Middle East. That has reduced supplies available to Ukraine. That's made the cities of Kyiv and critical national infrastructure in Ukraine more vulnerable, and that is something that President Putin has capitalized upon. Now, there's no suggestion that Ukraine is going to be able to develop its own Patriot system. There was a suggestion they might be able to build some on license, but quite frankly, almost certainly the priority for America will be rebuilding their stockpiles. So there's no chance really of Ukraine building theirs. But if Ukraine was able to develop its own ballistic missile, then potentially it could hold a lot more targets within Russia at risk. Now, that's not an easy undertaking. However, Iran has managed to develop a ballistic missile program, as has North Korea. So it's very doable. And of course, the challenge with Western support, all of that technology is available today. The challenge for the West normally with these programs is testing and evaluation adds lots of cost to the program and time. That is not something Ukraine would have to do. They'd be able to test these things in contact. As Sun Tzu famously said, opportunities multiply if they are seized. Russia is trying to drag Ukraine into a war of attrition. That's not something that Ukraine can prevail in. However, technology provides significant opportunity for Ukraine, potentially even changing the course of the war.